There are names from the ancient world that for centuries were just synonymous with terror, with absolute power, and with a kind of brutal, calculating order. And at the top of that list is the name Assyria. This wasn't just another kingdom. No, this was an empire that perfected the art of conquest and control, becoming a name that inspired both awe and, let's be honest, dread across the entire known world.
I mean, at its peak, the Neo-Assyrian state was what you'd call a true universal empire. Just look at this map. It really shows you the sheer scale of it. Their influence stretched all the way from the mountains of modern-day Iran, down through Mesopotamia, across the Levant, and deep into Egypt. They completely dominated the entire Near East. They were this massive power whose borders were only really stopped by geography itself, by deserts, mountains, and the sea. So the question is, how did they do it, right? How did they build this world-spanning empire and actually hold it all together? Well, their success really rested on two incredibly powerful pillars: a sacred mission from their supreme god, and a radical, ruthless administrative strategy that literally reshaped the very populations they conquered.
So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to break down that machine, we'll explore the core ideology that drove them forward, and the brilliant and frankly terrifying innovations that allowed them to dominate their world. What was the secret to their success? Okay, so first things first, to understand Assyria, you absolutely have to understand their god. The entire Assyrian state, from the king all the way down to the lowest soldier, operated under the divine command of their supreme deity, Ashur. For them, every single campaign, every conquest, was part of a sacred mission. The Assyrian kings saw themselves as the chosen agents of Ashur here on Earth, so their conquests weren't just for territory or for riches, they saw it as a religious duty. In their worldview, any lands outside of Assyrian control represented chaos, and any king who dared to defy them wasn't just defying Assyria, he was defying the cosmic order established by Ashur himself. War to them was the act of restoring that divine order. And this quote, it just perfectly captures their mindset. To the Assyrians, every single victory on the battlefield was more proof of Ashur's absolute supremacy. If other gods couldn't protect their own people from the Assyrian army, well, it was simply because Ashur was more powerful. This belief was the ultimate justification for their relentless, unending expansion. And they reinforced that message constantly. Wow. Assyrian palaces were just covered in these incredibly intricate reliefs, just like this one. But they weren't just decoration, oh no. This was sophisticated state propaganda. Imagine you're a visiting diplomat or a vassal king. You'd walk past these graphic, carved-in stone reminders of what happens to cities that rebel. It was psychological warfare as art. Okay, so you've got this divine mandate to expand Ashur's order across the world. But you need a new kind of tool to make that happen, right? Well, this brings us to the rise of a new king, a man who would forge that very tool and turn Assyria's potential into a truly terrifying reality.
So, in 745 BCE, a guy named Tiglath-Pileser III seizes the throne in a coup. This man was a visionary, and he was absolutely ruthless. He knew the old way of doing things just wasn't going to cut it anymore. So in his very first year, he unleashes the series of sweeping reforms that would pull Assyria out of a slump and set it on the path to becoming a true world power. His biggest move, his most crucial reform, was military. He got rid of the old system of calling up farmers for seasonal campaigns. Instead, he created the world's first true professional standing army, a permanent, year-round fighting force. And here's the brilliant part. He swelled its ranks by conscripting soldiers from the very nations he defeated, turning former enemies into cogs in his war machine. This permanent army became absolute masters of warfare, especially the really complex logistics of sieging and conquering fortified cities.
But this incredible, unstoppable army, that was only half of the machine. The other half was a revolutionary and, brutal policy of social engineering. It was designed not just to conquer people, but to completely remake them. And these ancient reliefs, they show us the whole Assyrian playbook in two stark steps. First comes the conquest of a city, the military victory. But that, you see, was just the beginning. Next came the consequence. Entire populations being systematically marched away from their homes, their lives uprooted forever. Now, this wasn't random cruelty. No, this was an official, calculated state policy. It even had its own name, našāhu, which is an Assyrian word that literally means to root out.
The goal was to uproot entire communities from their native lands and then resettle them somewhere else in their vast empire. So why? What was the point of doing all this? Well, the strategic goals were multi-layered, and from an imperial perspective, pretty brilliant. First off, deportation completely shattered local identities and loyalties, making future rebellion almost impossible. It also let them repopulate strategic lands with new, loyal subjects. And maybe most importantly, it was a way to redistribute human capital, moving skilled craftsmen, farmers, and administrators wherever the empire needed them most. The end goal? To create a single, integrated Assyrian society. And it's really crucial to understand this. These deportees were not typically enslaved. Now, their lives were undoubtedly hard, but they were resettled and integrated into the imperial economy as farmers, builders, and artisans. Some were even drafted into the army, turning conquered peoples into fuel for the engine of conquest. They became the very workforce that built the empire's magnificent cities and monuments. So, now you can start to see how these two huge innovations, the professional army and the policy of deportation, were designed to work together perfectly. They created this powerful, self-reinforcing cycle that just constantly fueled the empire's growth. Let's just break down this feedback loop. The army goes out, conquers new territory. That gives them new populations to deport. Then, the policy of deportation secures that new territory by breaking old loyalties and preventing rebellion. And those same deported populations then provide the labor and even new soldiers needed to strengthen the state's core. And a stronger core, well, that supports and enables the army to launch even more conquests. It was a perfectly designed, self-fueling machine. And the result of all this? The result of this relentless machine was the creation of the land of Ashur, which is what the kings called it. Through military and demographic engineering, they forged a unified, monolithic whole. And for a time, it was the largest, most powerful, and most complex empire the world had ever witnessed. The Assyrian machine was, you can't deny it, incredibly effective. It created a superpower that dominated the Near East for centuries. But it does leave us with a final, lingering question. Could an empire forged in fear, held together by forced migration and the constant threat of violence, truly be stable in the long run? Or did the very tools of its creation contain the seeds of its eventual collapse?